And now, the Deeper Thinking Podcast, a space for ideas and reflections in our uncertain times.
Welcome to the Deeper Thinking Podcast. What if the limits we resent are the very things that shape us? What if the moments we remember most weren't born from abundance, but from absence, from the things we didn't have, the space we couldn't leave, the time that ran out too soon? This isn't a story about failure, it's about form, about how something narrow might become more than a restriction, how it might become the very thing that holds meaning in place, or lets it land, quietly, without fanfare. And maybe more clearly than anything wide open ever could. In this episode, we explore how constraint, whether material, emotional, or existential, doesn't suffocate creativity, but gives it structure and weight. Through the lives and work of artists like Daniel Johnston, Vivian Maier, and Agnes, we trace how limits can become vessels, containers for honesty, for stillness, for care. These aren't tales of overcoming. They're invitations to see what can only emerge when you stop trying to escape the frame and begin to build within it. A child builds a tree house, not in a forest, but in the only tree that will hold one. It's not high, not hidden, not what the books imagined. The boards don't quite line up. The roof is an old tarp. But something happens in the making. The gap becomes a window. The slope becomes a slide. Constraint becomes creativity, not in theory, but in wood and nail and weather. It isn't about what the treehouse could have been. It's about what it is, because of where it had to be built. That's the heart of it. Not just the child's project, but the condition of all art worth staying with. Constraint doesn't interrupt creativity. It gives it shape. Without limitation, everything risks becoming gesture. With it, attention sharpens, every board matters, every inch of space is negotiated, and somehow, in the narrowing, something larger is made. This is not a sentimental idea. Sartre argued that human freedom isn't the absence of constraint, but the necessity to act within it. The child can't move the tree, can't afford the lumberyard, can't draw from unlimited blueprint, but they can build, they can respond, they can make meaning from what resists them. And that's the work, not in fleeing the edge, but pressing into it. Artists do the same. So do thinkers. So do we. Not always with boards and tarps, but with time, fatigue, grief, the wrong materials, the right refusal. Some of the most lasting art has come not from having everything, but from being left with almost nothing. Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska, recorded on a 4-track cassette in a rented house, has more emotional weight than albums built with orchestras, because it couldn't hide. The hiss is part of the voice. Simone Weil would call this attention, not to what's ideal, but to what is. Noticing the grain of the wood you were given, listening to the silence between the words. Choosing to work with the world rather than abstracting away from it. The child's treehouse doesn't escape gravity, it cooperates with it, and that cooperation becomes expression. What makes the structure hold isn't freedom, it's form. The edge of the treehouse, like the edge of the canvas or the bar of the melody, isn't a limit on imagination, it's its condition. Not everything is possible, but some things are. And when you find them, not in spite of the constraint, but through it, they last, they stay, because they were built where they had to be. Daniel Johnston recorded songs alone in his parents' basement, onto a cheap cassette deck, using a toy keyboard with stuck keys. His voice warbled, the hiss was louder than the chords, and still, his music cuts through. Not because it's raw, but because it's precise in its rawness. He wasn't trying to sound lo-fi, he simply had no choice. And in that absence of polish, something rare emerged, a voice that sounded like it meant every word. The constraints didn't lessen the music's power, they were the reason it could speak. There's a kind of emotional geometry to this. When the tools are few, the choices matter more. Johnston's broken equipment didn't dilute his creativity, they focused it. Like a painter with only one brush or a writer limited to one syllable length, the shape of the art becomes visible, the hand becomes traceable, the mistake becomes part of the meaning. This isn't about mythologizing struggle, it's about noticing how form arises from need. Johnston's melodies repeat, not because he lacked ideas, but because repetition became architecture. The cracked voice wasn't fixed, it was folded into the lyric. Each constraint became an anchor, each limit became a guide. McLuhan would say the medium is the message. Here it's more than that. The medium is the wound, and the wound is audible. The tape hiss is not noise, it's presence. You can hear the room he recorded in. You can feel its size, its quiet. What gets created in those conditions isn't just music, it's space. And in that space, you hear not just the song, but the conditions under which it was made. Simone Weil again, to attend to the real is a form of love. Johnston didn't abstract his pain. He didn't shape it into metaphor. He let it speak in loops, in static, in fragments. He stayed close to it. And in that closeness, the songs stop being performances. They become confessions or prayers or postcards from a room no one was supposed to enter. This is the truth at the centre of Constraint. Not that it inspires in spite of lack, but that it shapes attention so completely that what's made inside it can't be made any other way. And when that happens, when the form carries not just intention, but necessity, what you hear stays with you. It doesn't impress, it haunts. There's a film where nothing really happens. Two men sit at a table in a quiet restaurant, talking over dinner. No flashbacks, no music, no resolution, just talk. My Dinner with Andre breaks every rule of cinematic storytelling. There's no action, no setting changes, no climax, but it's transfixing because the constraint becomes the form, the stillness becomes the stage, and the conversation, unspooled in real time, becomes a kind of intimacy that movement would only disrupt. The table itself becomes the third presence, not a proper limit. It anchors the exchange, forces the words to carry more. There's no way to distract, no place to cut to. All that exists is thought, tone, contradiction. Andre longs for ecstatic freedom, spiritual adventure, the breakdown of modern complacency. Wallace holds back, favouring quiet rituals, grounded living. But the film doesn't choose between them. It lets both views sit in tension. That's the genius of the frame. It doesn't resolve, it holds. Constraint here is more than a cinematic tool, it's a philosophical position. Sartre again, freedom is not the absence of limits, but the enactment of meaning within them. The dinner becomes an existential stage. The limits of time, place and conversation aren't obstacles. They're what allows the talk to matter, and more importantly, to stay fragile. Neither man knows what to make of the other. That not knowing is never corrected. This refusal to resolve is what gives the film its power. It's not a debate. It's not a journey. It's a suspension. The camera lingers. The pauses stretch. The viewer begins to listen not for answers, but for tone, the silences between lines, the shift in energy, the discomfort that hovers when one man interrupts the other. There's no performance, just presence. And presence, when uninterrupted, becomes almost unbearable. Almost sacred. It would have been easy to script epiphany, to lead the viewer toward a lesson, but that would have betrayed the ethic of the dinner. Instead, the film ends quietly. They part. Wallace walks home. The city hums. Nothing is explained, but something remains, a residue, a pressure. That's what Constraint can do. Not simplify, but suspend. Not limit, but concentrate. My Dinner with Andre doesn't work in spite of its confinement. It works because of it. The limits let the questions breathe, and in that air something begins to form. Not an answer, but a kind of truth, felt not claimed, kept not declared. Vivian Maier took over 150,000 photographs and showed almost none of them. She worked as a nanny, walked the streets of Chicago with a Rolleiflex camera, captured strangers in mid-thought, corners of rooms, reflections layered inside other reflections. Her images weren't cropped or colour corrected. They weren't exhibited or sold. Many weren't even developed. They just existed, quietly, meticulously, within the limits of what she could carry and where she could go. And yet the work is astonishing, because the constraint wasn't a hindrance. It was the condition of her seeing. There's a kind of integrity in that, not moral, but aesthetic. A refusal to perform, to polish, to anticipate reception. Maier wasn't creating for a gallery wall. She was practicing a kind of attention. Each frame composed without knowing if it would be preserved. That unknown becomes part of the image. The grain, the shadow, the moment held not because it would be remembered, but because it asked to be noticed. Heidegger might say this is a form of dwelling, to be within the world, not mastering it, but inhabiting it with care. Maier's constraint, her anonymity, her employment, her access, wasn't just a fact of life. It shaped the kind of truth she could gather. And so her photographs carry a different tone. Less ambition, more witness. The images don't shout. They don't try to explain. They remain open, unresolved, like the lives they depict. You can feel the streets quiet, the movement just beyond the frame. There's no drama, only presence. Constraint here becomes atmosphere. The lens is still, the timing is exact, and the emotion, never forced, leaks through. In a world addicted to output and audience, Maier's silence is its own kind of defiance. She didn't chase acclaim, she let the work gather dust. That dust became part of the archive, part of the aura. Walter Benjamin argued that art's power often lives in its distance, its here and not here-ness. Maier's work lives there, in that paradox. Immediate and unreachable, seen and unseen. What she made is not a monument, it's a residue. The mark left by someone working within a narrow path, without permission, without applause, and still seeing more clearly than most. Constraint didn't distort her vision, it focused it. It shaped the line of sight, and the photographs remain not because they resolved something, but because they didn't, because they held still, long enough for us to follow. Agnes Martin painted grids. Just grids, pale, measured, hand-drawn lines on large, quiet canvases. From a distance, they look like nothing. Up close, they hum. Each painting is a discipline, not a display. She worked slowly, alone, often in silence, refusing interpretation. She didn't want her work understood, she wanted it felt. And the limits she placed on herself, no narrative, no expressionism, no variation beyond the barely perceptible, were not restrictions, they were devotion. Constraint for Martin was a spiritual act. Her lines are never machine perfect. They shake, they drift, and yet they hold. That's the paradox. What looks like repetition becomes reverence. Each line is an event, not because it announces itself, but because it doesn't. Her constraint doesn't flatten the work, it deepens it, like a bell rung softly over and over until the sound becomes a room. Simone Weil might have seen her studio as a kind of prayer cell. Attention without ambition, presence without push. Martin once said her paintings are about innocence, not intellect. Not what she thought, but what she waited for. And so she reduced. No colour, no story, no ego. Just pencil and paint and line after line until something arrived, or didn't. The beauty of her work isn't in what it reveals, but in what it refuses to chase. No message, no performance, just steadiness, stillness, the kind that invites the viewer not to admire but to stay. The canvases don't want to be seen quickly, they want to be dwelt with, and in that dwelling something happens. Not dramatic, not verbal, but real, a softening, a shift. There's no climax, no flourish, no sudden insight, just rhythm. And from rhythm, meaning, not loud, but earned. Hegel's dialectic moves through synthesis, Martin's moves through surrender. The painting isn't a resolution, it's an echo of attention held past the point of comfort. And that's the work. Not to dazzle, but to endure. We often assume that freedom leads to greatness, that the artist left alone unbounded will touch the sublime, but Martin suggests the opposite. It's the wall, the rule, the frame that invites depth. Her grids are not prisons, they are thresholds. And what crosses them is not brilliance, it's presence, measured, quiet, incomplete, but whole, because of how little was allowed and how much was found anyway. There's a kind of grace in the thing that holds back. In the song that never reaches chorus, the line that stays unfinished, the painting that whispers, not because they lack something, but because they've chosen to stop before excess begins. That's what the work of constraint often leaves behind. Not closure, but a residue, a pressure, a pause that allows the real to land. Each of these artists, Johnston, Maier, Martin, shared no aesthetic, no genre, no goal, but they shared a frame. Not a prison, a posture, a way of attending to the world that honoured the edge, the available, the imperfect. And in that attending, they built something that lasts. Not by mastering the materials, but by letting the materials speak. Broken tape, undeveloped film, uneven graphite. They let the flaw become the thread. We crave this more than we admit. In a world trained to escalate, to go louder, brighter, fuller, the smallest gesture begins to feel like a kind of defiance. A treehouse built from scrap, a dinner made with what's left, a photograph never shown. These aren't accidents, they're ethics. They suggest a different measure of value, one that doesn't ask how much you've done, but how closely you've stayed. The philosopher Gaston Bachelard once wrote that the house is not just a structure, it's a space of dreaming. But dreaming doesn't need scale, it needs shelter, something to hold it. That's what constraint becomes, at its best, not a limit, but a vessel, a place for the thing to arrive. Not everything needs to be big to be felt. Not everything needs to be finished to be real. So the question shifts. It's no longer what could be made if there were no limits. It becomes what becomes possible only within them. The dance in the taped square, the grid on the empty canvas, the song that loops its longing. None of these forms overcome their edges. They embrace them. And in doing so, they show us something we forget in our rush to expand. That there is depth in staying, that the smallest structure can carry the heaviest truths, that what we build when we are finally held still might be the most lasting thing we make, not in spite of what's missing, because of it. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Deeper Thinking podcast. Today's episode was narrated by Holly, our digital narrator, who helps bring our ideas to life. For further reading, research, and ways to support the podcast, please visit the episode webpage. Thank you for your positive reviews on Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help keep us visible so others can discover and enjoy our content.